So we have Jen Forman Orth. She's here. She works for the State Department of Agriculture. She is an environmental biologist, and she's going to talk to us about commonly encountered insects that we might find while herping, and as well as other things.
Okay.
Invasive species, to be exact. She's going to lecture me on that.
We are starting a full half hour after we were supposed to. I'm taking my damn hour, so I'm not going to be done in half an hour, okay? Just warning you. All right. So I'm going to be talking to you about two specific invasive species today, Asian Longhorn Beetle, Emerald Ash Borer. I don't really have time to get into the whole thing about what it means to be an invasive species and stuff like that, so let's just say they're both pests that are not native to America and have become established here and are causing problems. When we say that we're worried about invasive species, there's two different categories of things that we care about. Are they causing some kind of negative economic impact, or are they causing some kind of a negative ecological impact? Economic impact is basically, just getting rid of it costs a prohibitively large amount of money, or treating it, or restoring things. Or is it an agricultural pest that is causing a loss to an agricultural commodity? Does it attack, apples, or does it attack, pine trees, and so wood producers are having losses harvesting wood to use to build furniture and things like that. And in terms of the ecological impact, there's the threat to native species, either plants or animals, depending on what kind of invasive pest we're talking about, the loss of habitat, the loss of food sources for wildlife, and the loss of biodiversity. So specifically, what this means is that if we have a forest pest like Asian Longhorn Beetle comes in and it attacks maple trees, then it could be negatively impacting the fall foliage season, which is going to negatively impact the tourism industry in New England. It could be the maple syrup industry that's negatively impacted, or the timber industry. So these are all, they could be rather large economic costs. In terms of the local impact, if you are losing part of the natural environment that you're used to having around you, you could be dealing with things like loss of shade because the trees around your yard died. And then that could bring up your air conditioning costs in the summer. Trees provide not just shade, but also noise barriers. So maybe you live in the city of Worcester, and you're used to having trees around you, and you don't realize until those trees get cut down that it's freaking loud because there's like a bar right next to your house, and you never really realized what a service those trees provided for you. Other things like wildlife habitat. Where do squirrels go when you cut down all the trees in your yard? They go in your attic sometimes, which is a huge pain in the butt, right? We have just general loss of quality of life caused by all these different impacts that are felt when a pest comes in and we can't get rid of it. Now, you guys are herpers, and you're probably familiar with the whole Burmese Python story, but you also know that people are maybe sometimes not the smartest about what they want to do with a pet that they don't want anymore, and they just think, well, I'll give it back to nature. I'll dump my fish in the lake, I'll let my snake go, and it'll just freeze to death or whatever. But I think you guys get what that means, in that most of the time when people do stuff like that, nothing happens, right? That's the reality of it. There are like hundreds and thousands of undocumented failures of introduction of invasive species every year in the United States. Like, we just have no idea because somebody dropped a plant in a dump somewhere, or they let, an unwanted pet go and it just died, Excuse me. So what makes a pest successful in terms of its ability to establish a population and become something that causes problems? Things like high fecundity, so makes a lot of offspring. Rapid growth rate, whether it's a plant or an animal. Being tolerant of a variety of different environmental conditions. So if you're not freeze tolerant and you're in New England, you're probably not going to make it. Right now anyway, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, I don't know. But for now, most of the time, that's going to not be a successful way of you getting introduced to a temperate climate. a lack of natural enemies, so your predators were left behind in the country you came from, and so there's nothing to stop you. There's no, if you're an invasive plant, there's nothing that is really eating you, and so you can just kind of grow unfettered. The ability to alter the environment in advantageous ways. One of the ways plants are really good at doing this is something called allelopathy. So something like glossy buckthorn, that if you guys are out in the woods ever, you've probably encountered glossy buckthorn. It's a huge invasive plant that tends to create monocultures where there's nothing but buckthorn. And it turns out that the roots of this plant exude a toxin that kill anything that isn't buckthorn. So that's great. Once you get in there, then nothing else is going to grow. Association with humans is correlated with successful invasion. So if you can find a way to keep getting introduced to an environment over and over again, then if that has to do with humans, like you're hitchhiking on herd animals, or you're coming over, like I was talking about, on boats, or on your eggs are in pallet wood or something like that, then that's going to increase your ability to proliferate when you get to a new place. Also, repeated introductions. So if something keeps coming in over and over again, either the same way or different ways, like it's a plant that comes in because people want to plant it in their garden, but also beekeepers want to plant it because it provides forage for bees, and also people decided it has some magical herbal properties, and then all these different ways of people bringing it in. It's more and more opportunities to establish, it's more and more genetic material to provide that base to create a stable population. So the two pests that I'm going to be talking to you about today are wood-boring pests. That means that they eat wood, and their larvae survive inside wood. And the reason why this is a problem is because when we bring goods here from other countries, in this case these are both pests from Asia, and so in most cases we're talking about China because that's where we get a lot of our goods these days. They're typically packed in pallets or crates, or it's cable that's on big cable spools. That's made out of wood. It's not always made out of wood, sometimes it's plastic, but typically it's something called solid wood packing material. And for a really long time, nobody was really looking at the fact that this wood was carrying over tons of hitchhiking pests and even fungal pathogens with it. And that's what led to the two species that I'm going to talk to you about today getting here. They've closed this loophole for the most part by instigating fumigation and heat treatment rules. So if you want to put things into wooden pallets and ship them here from Asia, they have to be fumigated or heat treated, and you have to stamp it. But some folks still don't follow the rules, so this is still an issue, along with the fact that Customs and Border Patrol is maybe going to be inspecting 5 to 10% of all the stuff that's coming through here from other countries for pests. They just don't have the resources to do it. So some stuff's still getting through. Like I said, most of it doesn't go anywhere, but it happens. All right, so once wood-boring pests are here, then the real problems start because they can spread. So we have this vector of introduction, that's what I call it, that we're talking about how it gets into our country. And then we have vectors of spread. So once there is an Asian longhorn beetle in a tree, someone cuts down the tree or it falls down, and they decide this is really great firewood. I'm going to take it with me when I go camping in Ohio because I don't want to have to buy the wood when I get there. And so then it gets spread somewhere. Firewood is actually a really major vector of spread for wood-boring pests, but also storm debris. So I didn't even realize this was a thing until it happened to us. In December of 2008, we had this horrible ice storm come through that impacted particularly the central part of the state. And I learned about the fact that people will drive here hundreds of miles from other states because they want to offer their services to take, to help clear the debris out of your yard. But then what they're going to do is they're going to take all that wood with them and sell it. So they're going to make double the money. And that's fine until it turns out that they're packing pests with them when they drive out of the state. And just the regular removal of wood after tree maintenance, particularly utilities that are always worrying about when power lines are up above, rather than underground. They need to constantly be maintaining trees so that they're not interfering with the power lines and causing power outages. In the case of Worcester, where there's that Asian longhorn beetle infestation, Worcester didn't want to deal with all of that waste wood when the utilities were maintaining the trees. And so they had a rule in place way before anyone knew about Asian longhorn beetle saying, if you get this wood, when you do this maintenance, you need to find another place to put that wood. We don't want to deal with it in Worcester. So they were required to take it out of the city. And we have no idea in many cases where it was going. This means that even if you don't live near one of the places where these pests are currently known, you're still at risk. All right, so let's talk about Asian longhorn beetle first. This is an introduced pest native to Asia, like its common name suggests. It's a longhorn beetle in the Cerambycidae family. They call it longhorn because the antennae are really long. They're typically as long as or longer than the body of the insect for most of the beetles in the Cerambycidae. This is a wood-boring pest that attacks hardwood trees, primarily maple. Okay, scientific name is Anoplophora glabripennis. The specific epithet glabripennis is, if you can remember it, is a good thing to remember in terms of the identification of this pest. Glaber means glabrous or smooth. Pennis is a reference to the wings or the wing covers. And if you look at this picture, you can see the beetle is very, very shiny because the wing covers are so smooth. So we first found out about Asian longhorn beetle in August of 2008, which was the first summer that I ever did this job. And it's all kind of been downhill from here in terms of the excitement of being at my job. There was a woman in Worcester that called my boss because she was worried that there were these beetles all over her yard and she was convinced it was the Asian longhorn beetle. How many of you guys get people asking you to ID reptiles or amphibians, right? Okay, so most of the time when someone tells you that they're convinced it's species A, is it actually species A? It's like some other common thing, right? So 99% of the time when people call, it's not the big bad thing. And you kind of get used to that after a while, but this woman was very persistent. She called my boss, and then she called the woman that worked with my boss at the USDA, and then she called my boss and said, you really need to follow up on this. And so I called her and I said, do you have any pictures? Which these days is a much easier thing to get than back in 2008, where it wasn't that common that people had, there were not really smartphones and maybe your flip phone took pretty shots. But it was Friday and it was like 4:30 in the afternoon. I was just like, try to send me some pictures. You said, oh, I'll try. And then for some reason I checked my work email when I got home and she had sent these pictures, which she admitted were cruddy because they were from her flip phone. They're not going to be in National Geographic, but they are bad, enough that I could tell that it was something really bad. So I'm going to teach you guys how to ID Asian longhorn beetle. I'm going to send around that guy. And if you want, like afterwards, if you want to do video of any of these, you could do that. So pass that around. But I kind of want to get you guys in a familiar place, so I thought we could do it with a reptile, sort of, dressed up as an Asian longhorn beetle. This is from the Worcester Ecotarium, if any of you are familiar with their dinosaur. So the first thing to look for is Asian longhorn beetle are black with bright white spots on them. They sort of look like somebody took a little paintbrush and dipped it in white paint and splattered it across the wing covers of the beetle. The second thing to look for is those black and white banded antennae. Not unique to Asian longhorn beetle, but if somebody mentions that, then I'll usually want to take a second look. And then the third thing is the blue coloring on the feet. So if you go back to the cruddy cell phone camera photos that Donna sent in, what can you guys tell me that identifies these as Asian longhorn beetle? Anybody?
White spots.
You can definitely see the white spots. Anybody?
The one with the blue feet.
Yeah, you can see the blue feet. It looks like he's wearing little blue socks, right? What else? Anything? Might not be that easy to see here. I mean, you can, I know it's really blurry, but on the one on the left, you can see that the antennae are black and white banded. So the reason that matters is Asian longhorn beetle is one of the few species that creates a need for a federal response. It's of regulatory significance, and the feds did come. It was kind of incredible. Now, again, I'll kind of go back to what I was saying. What do people ask you the most to ID that what do they think it is? It's not like rattlesnake. I have a rattlesnake.
Rattlesnakes and copperheads.
Okay, and copperheads, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say the first.
Oh yes, water moccasins.
So we have that kind of thing in the insect ID world, specifically for Asian longhorn beetle. And after fielding over 1,000 reports over the past 9 years, we've come up with what we know people are gonna report. And then I have another thing I'm gonna pass around to show you the most common one. That's that one.
Yeah.
Please consider taking one of the lookalike sheets that I have up here. There's a bunch of copies there so that you can have one. But to me, I was trying to think of how I felt about this and how herpers would feel about this. And I figure sometimes you get people that are at the level where they don't know the difference between a frog and a toad, right? And then sometimes people know the difference between a frog and a toad, but they're not sure between these two toads. You guys recognize all three of these? Right, so we have the tree frog up on the top, and do you recognize the two toad species?
Follows an American.
Yeah, Fowler's an American, but when I look at them, I get toad in my head, but I can't tell. And so with the one I'm passing around now, the white-spotted Sawyer, it's the one that looks the most similar to Asian longhorn beetle, but is actually a native cerambycid. So it's the same family, but it's a different genus and species. It's a native species that attacks diseased or damaged pine. So it's not harmful, but it attacks pine, and we have pine all over the state, and so they're very commonly reported. And many of them have died for the cause of eradicating Asian longhorn beetle because people will capture them, kill them, and then report it. But this is what they look like up close. These are specimens that people have brought into my office or sent pictures of. And take a look at the specimens so you can see this on the side-by-side of what I'm sending around. They're both black. They both have white spots. They both have banded antennae. But if you look, the white-spotted Sawyer has more of a rough wing cover that's pitted if you get really close. It's not shiny. It doesn't have those cartoony white spots. There's fewer white markings there. But what I usually do when I sort of do a phone screen with people is there's this half circle right there. That's the scutellum. And on Asian longhorn beetle, it's black. But on the white-spotted Sawyer, it's white. And actually, if you really zoom in, it's white hairs that are on a black scutellum. But you could clearly see that marking. I tell people on the phone, like behind the neck, whatever gets them to that point. The other thing about the white-spotted Sawyers is that they emerge typically around Memorial Day weekend, whereas Asian longhorn beetle doesn't come out till July. So we can actually track the spikes in reports to our pest hotline and to the website reporting system every Memorial Day or the first weekend around the end of May where it's warm and people actually go outside and the calls start coming in like crazy. Okay, so that's what the adults look like. But the adults aren't the life stage that are actually doing the damage. That's actually the larva. So I'm going to go through the life cycle with you to kind of give you an idea of there. Okay, this is not rated R. Don't worry about it. What this is something called mate guarding. So these guys have already mated, and we have the female on the bottom here. Well, I shot this at the base of a maple tree, looking up like this with the camera. So we have the female on the bottom, and she is digging an egg site. And the male is guarding her to make sure that no other males mate with her. So kind of sucks for her, because really she just wants to dig that hole, and he's sitting there, basically being a pain. But anyway, she is going to spend anywhere from half an hour to an hour digging that one pit in the tree, and then she's going to lay one egg in there and cover it over with a bit of chewed up wood to kind of cement it in there. And a female beetle can lay anywhere from 45 to 90 eggs in a season based on when she emerges. So she comes out in July, and then she will live until, if she's lucky, she'll live until the first hard frost, which is typically November. And all that time she's going to be mating and laying eggs. Once the eggs hatch, the larvae start to bore their way into the tree. And I think do I want to send? No, I'm gonna wait to send the wood around. I might actually, Kurt, have you do that, so I don't have to keep looking around. I'll tell you which piece of wood to send out.
Sure.
So it's the larvae that are doing the damage inside the tree. They can survive the whole winter inside the wood. This is a temperate species from China. They don't freeze to death because they're nice and snug inside the insulated wood of the tree. They are basically eating, creating tunnels, and filling it with their frass, which is fecal material, which looks like wood because that's pretty much all they're eating. They have bacteria in their gut that let them digest the wood. This is after the larvae get bigger and bigger and bigger until they're basically like that long. They will pupate inside the wood for about 2 weeks and then emerge as adults, unless this happens really late in the season. In some cases, they might overwinter as those big larvae and then pupate the next summer. The interesting thing about this photo is that the beetle, once it emerges from the pupal case, is boring its way out perpendicular to the grain of the wood. I hope you can see that in this photo. And that becomes important for ID purposes. And then they emerge as the adult beetle, again, sometime anywhere from July through even November. All right, so what do these things attack besides maple? A whole slew of other species, 13 different genera of trees. Maple, horse chestnut, elm, willow, and birch are the main hosts. They will also attack everything else on this list. There is another guide that I left there that you can take copies of that shows you all the different host trees in case you see damage that you think might be caused by Asian longhorn beetle. Also take a look at this. This is from Kendrick Park in Worcester. So that tree looks like somebody shot it up, right? But those are all exit holes and egg-laying sites. Things that Asian longhorn beetle doesn't attack, it doesn't attack softwoods, so none of those Christmas tree type trees. It doesn't attack pine, spruce, or fir. It also does not go after oak or cherry or crabapple. So if you, after today, your eyes are kind of open to Asian longhorn beetle and you start seeing holes in trees and you notice like the cherry tree in your front yard has a hole, that's not going to be Asian longhorn beetle. Also, if there are maples in the area, they're going to gravitate to the maples. So if you see holes in, an oak or a pine or something, and all your maples are fine, it's not Asian longhorn beetle. This is a map showing you every place where Asian longhorn beetle has been found. We have Boston and Worcester in Massachusetts. We also have Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York, and Canada. Two interesting things about this map. One is the yellow is showing you the maple forests of the Northeast, and so even though it's been found in New York, the folks up in maple country, the maple sugar producers in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, were much more worried about the Worcester find because of its proximity to all of that extensive maple forest. The other thing is that even though the New York infestation was found in 1996, and the Worcester one wasn't found until 2008, they've aged the Worcester find back to the mid-1990s, which means that it was there as long as the New York one. It's just that nobody reported it and or noticed it. All right, so let's say that you're concerned about Asian longhorn beetle and the damage it could be causing. Are you going to be likely to see the adults? Not so much. I always tell people you should be looking for the signs of Asian longhorn beetle tree damage, and so I'm going to run through that with you. For that, Kurt, it's that big chunk of wood, the big fat one. If you could just take a look first and then pass it around. The three things to look for are exit holes, egg-laying sites, and also frass. Are we also passing the lizard around? That's kind of cool.
No, I gotta go work.
Okay. All right, so what to look for with the exit holes. Like the ID cards that I'm going to... This is cool. I can make Kurt do whatever I want now, right? Can you hold up one of the ID cards with the circles cut out of them that's on the desk there? So please take one of those if you don't take anything else from today. So that hole is exactly the size and shape of an Asian longhorn beetle exit hole. Perfectly round like a drill hole, smooth on the edges. You can put it down if you want, I'm sorry. This is fun for me though. It's like an extra bonus. It looks like somebody made them with a drill bit. And sometimes we get calls from people that are worried about maple trees where the maples were actually tapped for maple syrup and the hole looks almost exactly the same. It's kind of amazing that they can do that. The thing that you can do, if you can safely do this, you can take the eraser end of a pencil and try to stick it in the hole if you're worried it might be caused by Asian longhorn beetle. It needs to go straight back at least an inch for you to be concerned. If it goes in like sideways, or if it just goes in a little bit, it wasn't caused by Asian longhorn beetle. And that was what I was telling you about before with that picture where the beetle emerges and then drills out perpendicular to the grain of the wood. If it goes in sideways, it's something like leopard moth or something like that. And then there's carpenter bees that do stuff like this too. You can also look for the egg-laying sites. When they are fresh, they have this sharp contrast against the bark because the beetle is chewing through the bark down into the cambium layer of the tree, which is typically an orange color. But as they age, and they will start to fade and callus over and look more like the egg site on the left. When they are fresh, again, they will also sometimes drip with sap. And in that Kendrick Park in Worcester, where the infestation was so heavy, the trees looked like they were drooling. You could see these long columns of bubbling sap dripping down from the trees, from the egg-laying sites. And then the other thing that happens is other opportunistic insects come in and feed off of that sap. So you'll see all this wasp activity all of a sudden. Another reason to keep an eye out. In fact, when we were first searching the area in Worcester when Asian longhorn beetle was found in that woman's backyard, so a bunch of kids sent us to Kendrick Park. They were like, oh yeah, we see those beetles everywhere, they're all over the trees. They were. I wish they had known enough to tell somebody earlier, but anyway. The egg-laying sites, they are small, they're only about ½ an inch wide, and they look different on different types of trees, so it can be a little tricky. So if you're a beginner, I will say just look for the exit holes. You're probably not going to notice the egg-laying sites. The other thing you can look for is the frass, which again is that sawdust-like fecal material produced by the beetles. Frass can be produced by many different insects that are causing damage to a tree, so that's not a unique character for Asian longhorn beetle, but if I saw frass collecting in the crooks of branches or along a fence that goes along a tree line, that would make me want to look at the upper canopy of the tree for exit holes and egg-laying sites. This is the primary picture that we get from people convinced that their tree has Asian longhorn beetle tree damage. Does anybody know what causes this? Nobody? Any birders here? Sapsucker damage, yeah. Asian longhorn beetle females will lay their eggs scattered around the tree. They don't lay them in lines. And if two larvae come in contact with each other, then one of them will just chew through the other, so there's no like organized entry or exit in or out of the tree. Right now in Worcester, where we have this major infestation, we have a 110 square mile quarantine area where you cannot move the wood out of that area, either live trees or firewood or anything like that, if it comes from potential host trees. They have checked over 5 million trees for signs of Asian longhorn beetle tree damage. They're on their second pass around the quarantine area and hoping to complete that soon. I think people are always surprised that Worcester has millions of trees just in Worcester proper. Oh, I should mention. So the quarantine is Worcester, Shrewsbury, Holden, Boylston, West Boylston, a little tiny piece of Auburn. So I call it Greater Worcester. One of the bad things about Asian longhorn beetle is once it gets into the tree, the only way to get rid of it is basically to kill the tree. If you looked at that piece of wood that I sent around, you know, hopefully you noticed that the tunnels go all the way in to the middle of the tree into the heartwood. So there's nothing that you can do. There's no chemical that you can use to treat a tree once the pest is into the heartwood, because it's gone past the conductive system of the tree, which is outer, you know, it's just under the bark. So there is no magic treatment. You just have to cut the tree down and chip it up into really tiny pieces, and that is what they did. And so imagine that you leave for work one morning and your street looks like this, because back in the 1950s, when a big tornado came through, they replanted a lot of Worcester street tree canopy with Norway maple and just monocultures. And then you came home after a day of Asian longhorn beetle infested tree removal, and the same street now looks like this. It's pretty devastating. You can see anything green there, that's a conifer, so it's not going to be attacked by Asian longhorn beetle. That's what happened to a lot of folks in the greater Worcester area. Now, they did find Asian longhorn beetle in Boston back in 2010, but the story is a lot different because when they found it, it had only been there for about 2 years, and they only found 6 infested trees. So in Worcester, it was there for over a decade, and they've had to remove 30,000 trees and counting. But, are you going to catch Asian longhorn beetle the second it gets to your town? No. But if you can catch it within a couple years, then that's the difference between having to remove 6 trees and tens of thousands of trees. The Boston infestation created a 10 square mile regulated area that has since been lifted because the beetle has been eradicated from that particular part of the state. I'm going to skip that for interest of time. Just another note, this is that Kendrick Park again. They did get a lot of grant money to replant the areas that had trees removed with non-host trees. They've also been taking a lot of care to make sure that rather than creating a monoculture of street trees, that they have a great mix, a lot of diversity, so that when the next bad thing comes through, it doesn't completely devastate the neighborhood. They are still dealing with a lot of the issues that I discussed before, though, because when you take away a mature maple, you don't replace it with a tree that big, you replace it with a tree that is like that diameter trunk. So they are dealing with increased cooling costs and wind damage that makes you have to repaint your house more frequently because the trees aren't there for shelter. So, if you are looking for Asian longhorn beetle tree damage, do it when it's super sunny because even trained experts have trouble finding it when it's cloudy, and especially if the trees are wet from rain. You can't really find exit holes. You do want to check the top branches or upper canopy of the tree. And it's easiest to spot this damage when there are no leaves on the trees. So, between fall and winter or in early spring before the trees leaf out. Half an hour, not bad. Okay, so next one is emerald ash borer, Agrilus planipennis. This is a slightly different story because, like its common name suggests, emerald ash borer attacks just ash trees, whereas Asian longhorn beetle had like 13 different genera of hardwood trees. So this is a very specific pest. Again, native to Asia, first found in the US back in 2002 and in southeastern Michigan. And it was thought, again, to be brought on as solid wood packing material, so those pallets and crates that folks are worried about. Moves through the US primarily on infested wood. Ash is sold a lot for firewood. It took us years to realize that this was a vector of spread of this pest, and by then it was pretty much too late. There are more than 50 million ash trees that have been destroyed by emerald ash borer. It comes in hard and fast and then moves on. It can kill a tree in just a few years. Again, the host is genus Fraxinus or ash, not mountain ash, which is ash trees, white, black, red, green. It also does attack something called the fringe tree, which is an ornamental species that, oh, hey, question, yeah.
It doesn't attack the brown ash tree?
I don't know that common name brown ash, so if its genus is Fraxinus, then it attacks it. If it isn't, then it doesn't. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that common name. The emerald ash borer life cycle is sort of similar to Asian longhorn beetle, but the eggs, instead of being, the female doesn't have to dig into the trunk to lay the eggs. She just lays them into the little like crooks of the bark of the ash tree. And then the larvae hatch after a couple of weeks and they bore their way under the bark of the tree. And Kurt, if you could send out those other 2 pieces of wood, those are from an ash tree. There's 2 things to notice on those. One is if you flip the one in your right hand over, you'll see all the tunneling, which is really kind of cool looking, but bad. So emerald ash borer doesn't go all the way into the heartwood. It stays just under the bark. That means you can treat it if you catch it early enough, but it also means that it is spending its entire life cycle right in the conductive system of the tree, which means that it kills the tree a lot faster because it's cutting off all the water and nutrient flow. I think that's all I want to say about that side. Yeah. All right. The adults, similar to Asian longhorn beetle, you're not likely to see an adult emerald ash borer around. They like to hang out on the tips of the branches of the ash tree, sunning themselves. But if you do think you see one, first of all, like their name suggests, they're emerald green. They're also very metallic. They're from a family of beetles called the Buprestidae, also known as the jewel beetles. They all tend to be very metallic looking. And this one is bright green, and then if they expose their abdomen because they're in flight, you'll see that the body is sort of a coppery purple color underneath. So versus other similar species in the same genus as emerald ash borer, it's pretty distinct. But, and you can see that this isn't my sheet, this is from Nebraska, and I just think it's kind of funny because they just went for like all knowledge levels with this thing. They're like, if it's green, we're putting it on this sheet because we don't want people to think that they have emerald ash borer. I tend to treat the public as like a little smarter than this, but maybe I should, I don't know. Yeah. These are the two things that are most frequently sent in to me as reports for emerald ash borer, neither of them are. The one on the left is the six-spotted tiger beetle. This is a ground beetle, which is why people are seeing them, but I'm always really impressed when someone sends me a report with a picture of one of them, because they're really fast. They zip around. I'm like, all right, you managed to get that, that's great. But you're not going to see an emerald ash borer running around on the ground. There's also the two-line chestnut borer, which is the same genus, Agrilus, as emerald ash borer, but it's a native species that attacks oak and chestnut. Thank goodness that it also attacks oak because it wouldn't be around anymore if it only attacked chestnut. But it's a much duller color and it has those very distinct white lines down longitudinally on the body and the wing covers. So again, it's the larvae of emerald ash borer that are doing all of this damage. And so I wanted to show you a picture of what the larvae look like. They have these series of sort of bell-shaped body segments on them. And because they're feeding just under the bark, they can kill a tree in just 1 to 2 years, even a mature ash tree. This is a map showing you the distribution of emerald ash borer. Notice anything versus the Asian longhorn beetle map? It's kind of everywhere, right? I always have to update this map, no matter how frequently I give talks about emerald ash borer. This is from September 1st. It has just been found in South Carolina. That's brand new. I stopped counting how many states because they don't offer me a running count. I'm sick of trying to count on the map. But it's getting close to 30. It's pretty extensive. Anything in that dark blue outline that you see is the federal quarantine. The South Carolina find happened so recently that the feds haven't even caught up with it, with the quarantine. What's the point of quarantining half of the United States? Is it going to stop emerald ash borer? No. Actually, what it does is it lets people do business inside the quarantine area, which is not what I realized quarantines were for until I started working for the government. But sometimes they're not meant to keep things out, or they're meant to keep them in. This is a map of Massachusetts, obviously, showing you not only the confirmed emerald ash borer infestation, but it's overlaid on a map showing you where the significant natural stands of ash are in the state. So specifically, Berkshire County, and also there's a nice slice on the eastern part of Hampshire and Hampden County that have a lot of ash in the forest there. Otherwise, really, it's street tree plantings or ornamental plantings around people's homes and here in the eastern part of the state, although all my neighbors have ash. 2 of them are dead now, but not from emerald ash borer, just from other things. This map is also out of date because my staff recently discovered an infestation in Waltham, so right in the middle of Middlesex, and also another town in Essex County, so I gotta get him to update this map. But you can see it's been found in many different parts of the state already. And I forget if I have the background of this. The first place it was ever found was in Dalton, which is right near Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And then the next place it was found was in North Andover in Essex. So within 2 years, we had it in both sides of Massachusetts. And at that point, we're like, what is the point of, we just quarantine the entire state? Because it has to be in between. And gradually we found it in Worcester, Wilbraham, I guess we're missing Norfolk County still. We'll get there. There's not a lot of ash in the southeastern part of the state, but okay. So again, you're not likely to see emerald ash borer adults, but what you should be doing is checking any ash trees you see for signs of tree damage. specifically tunnels beneath the bark. So those they call them galleries, that wavy pattern you saw. Hopefully everybody got to look at that piece of wood that went around. Those are tunnels filled with beetle poop. See, I'll just touch beetle poop. They make these S-shaped galleries, and if you look in the center, you'll see what happened is the larva hatched at the very top and started to go like this, and as it gets bigger, the gallery gets wider, and so it makes this weird like cone shape by the time it's done, and then it emerged down at the bottom there. There are plenty of insects that make galleries under the bark of trees in all different shapes and patterns, but this S-shaped or serpentine gallery is pretty distinct to emerald ash borer. The other thing you can look for, and that was what was on the other piece of wood, and I think the bark has it hopefully marked in like an orange ring, are the exit holes, which are distinctly D-shaped because the beetle is, the body is D-shaped. So when it tunnels its way out, you get this flat part and then the arc there. The other thing you can look for, and we've actually had people find, this is how the North Andover infestation was found, is something called blonding. So when there's all this insect larval activity and adult activity right in the, just under the bark of the tree, you start to get woodpecker interest, and they'll come in and peck, and what they do is they'll remove the bark of the tree in strips, leaving this yellowish cambium layer, or they call it blonding because it makes this yellow marking, and I hope you can see that on the picture here. So this is the same site, but just to show you like the close-up and then from really far away. So the North Andover site was actually, it's across from a restaurant and separated by a highway and then power lines. And you can actually see, if you stood in the parking lot of the restaurant, you can see all of that yellow marking up and down the ash trees there. The other thing that happens to ash when they start to get attacked by something that's basically girdling the tree is that you get this canopy die back, so the upper third of the tree will start to die, and in response you'll get this, what they call epicormic sprouting, so you get new leaves coming from the trunk of the tree, which is not normal for 99.9% of trees. That's not unique to emerald ash borer, but it is a reason to check it for those, for the tunneling and for the exit holes that I mentioned before. Unfortunately, ash are subject to numerous health issues, especially in the New England area. For probably a decade now, they don't even have a really good idea of what it is. They just call it general ash decline. And so these are trees that don't have emerald ash borer in this picture, but they're definitely dying and not doing well. So in general, they're thinking that as this pest sweeps through Massachusetts and up into New England, the majority of ash is just going to be replaced, like naturally by whatever is exposed when the canopy dies. There just won't be that much ash anymore. There's also a ton of other pests that will attack ash trees. So again, it's like if you see a hole in a tree, that doesn't mean it's the big bad thing, it means you should take a closer look. And so there's plenty of native species. There's something called the Lilac Bore or the ash lilac borer. I don't know, there's not a lot of creativity going into these names, but it attacks ash and it attacks lilac, and it is a clearwing moth. And so it will bore into the tree and chew through the wood, and you'll see a little hole, it just won't be D-shaped. These are other pests too. So unfortunately, based on that map you saw, they realized they were not going to be able to stop emerald ash borer. It was just spreading too far and too fast. And so rather than trying to eradicate it like they do when they find Asian longhorn beetle, they're just trying to manage it. Some of the things that we've been doing are surveys. Anybody ever seen these purple traps hanging from a tree? I was hoping you'd say yes, because you guys are out herping all the time. Oh well. They call these Barney traps because they're purple, like Barney the dinosaur, and they're covered with a sticky substance, and then there may or may not be a lure hanging in it, and there's just something about that purple color that attracts emerald ash borer. They also do something called trap trees. So this is effective in an area where they're pretty sure they have emerald ash borer, because you're destroying the tree when you do this, obviously. So you strip off a whole bunch of the bark, and then the tree has this wound response where it starts to emit chemicals that smell really great if you're an emerald ash borer. And emerald ash borers will show up and start to lay eggs and attack the tree. You wait until the season's over and winter comes, you chop down the tree, and then you strip the bark and look for signs of emerald ash borer larvae. You can also use this as a way of sort of creating a sink for a really heavy emerald ash borer infestation. So you know you have emerald ash borer in your town. You decide to take a dozen ash trees and girdle them as a way of discouraging. You make the emerald ash borer will go to those damaged trees, presumably stay away from the other ash in the area that haven't been damaged, and then at the end of the season you're going to cut and destroy every one of those girdled trees, and you remove that from the population. So it can slow down the spread of this pest. It will not eradicate it that way. You can, unlike with Asian longhorn beetle where it's in the heartwood and you can't treat it, you can actually use a pesticide like imidacloprid to do a systemic treatment to a tree that already has emerald ash borer. And you can keep that tree alive. Typically if it's like 1/3 damaged or less, then you're going to want to do something like that. They also have a few different biocontrol insects that they've been testing and releasing across the country to try to help manage this pest so we can save at least some of the ash that we have. If you're going to be checking for emerald ash borer, in your yard or neighborhood or wherever you're hanging out in the woods, then we do encourage people to report infestations. If you have one on your property, then you want to ID any kind of infestation as soon as possible, because it's a lot more dangerous and expensive to remove a completely dead tree than it is to decide to treat a tree or to remove it early and just kind of cut your losses. So in general, if you see either one of these pests or just any kind of insect that you're not sure what it is, we're always happy to take a photo or get a specimen and get somebody else to take a photo. You could just take the insect, put it in a container, pop it in the freezer. If you want to euthanize it, or put it in a jar with rubbing alcohol. You can report it online using the massnrc.org site, or you can go to asianlonghornbeetle.com or emeraldashborer.info, or you could just Google and find a place to report it. We would rather hear from 1 million people that have white-spotted sawyers than not hear from the people that actually found the pest. You can also check out our massnrc.org/pests website and get fact sheets and all kinds of educational materials for these and many other pests, or follow us on Twitter at masspests. Okay. Before I finish up, I do want to say, I know we wouldn't have time to talk about all the different pests that we care about, and so I did bring specimens and handouts for some other things I didn't talk about today. And I figure a lot of you guys are out in nature frequently, and it would be great if you just took or at least looked at some of these things, because we have things like Myla-minute vine, which is an invasive plant, and spotted lanternfly, which is a very distinctive looking odd Japanese insect that's probably on its way here from Pennsylvania, but we don't have any mass records yet, and I just always appreciate having spotters out there, so definitely take a look and grab stuff. All right, that's my last slide, so I could take questions or, hey, an hour, okay. I know I wasn't supposed to go the whole hour, but I knew I was also gonna go the whole hour, so sorry, but I'm set. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Hey.